Amsterdam, December 1945. A man sits in a locked room with an easel, a canvas, and a set of paints in front of him. Police officers stand behind him. Court-appointed art experts sit in a row, watching every stroke. Newspaper reporters take notes on his hands. He is not being asked to explain himself. He is being asked to paint a Vermeer from scratch in front of the people trying to prove that he cannot. If he fails, the charge waiting for him is treason, and treason in the Netherlands in 1945 carries the death penalty. He picks up the brush anyway. The critics. Amsterdam, 1928. Han van Meegeren has just spent years trying to become one of Holland's respected painters, in the tradition of the old Dutch masters he grew up studying. The critics are not impressed. One of them writes that Van Meegeren is a gifted technician who can imitate anyone and has every virtue except originality. Van Meegeren does not take the insult quietly. He starts a magazine with a friend and spends 2 years publicly attacking the same critics who dismissed him, calling their taste in modern art shallow and fashionable. It changes nothing. His reputation as a serious painter is already dead. So he decides on a different kind of proof. If the experts will not recognize his talent when his name is on the canvas, he will remove his name from the equation entirely and let them praise the exact same hand under someone else's. The process. For years, almost nobody sees him work. Van Meegeren buys genuine, worthless 17th century paintings just for their canvas and their frame, and scrapes them down to bare cloth so the weave and the stretcher will pass any age test. He grinds his own pigments by hand, using only the same raw materials a painter in Vermeer's era would have had access to. The one problem he cannot solve with 17th century materials is the paint itself. Real oil paint takes decades to fully harden. So he mixes his pigments with an early plastic resin, bakes the finished canvas in his oven for hours at a temperature past the boiling point of water, and the paint sets into something that behaves exactly like 300 years of drying. He rolls the dried canvas around a cylinder to crack the surface, the way old paint naturally cracks, then rubs ink into the cracks to fake centuries of collected dust. The main forensic check dealers rely on in the 1930s is simple. Dab a little alcohol on the surface and press a needle into the paint. Old, fully hardened paint resists both. Fresh paint dissolves under the alcohol and dents under the needle. Van Meegeren's baked plastic-hardened paint passes the alcohol test and the needle test every time, because chemically it is no longer paint that behaves like paint at all. Notice what he is not doing yet. He is not painting one convincing fake to unload for quick money. He is building an entire process, canvas, pigment, chemistry, precise enough to fool the same kind of expert eye that once looked at his own original work and found it lacking. If this were only about the money, sloppy would have been good enough. The care itself is the message. He is not trying to get rich. He is trying to prove those critics wrong, using a hand they will never know is his. The masterpiece. By 1937, Van Meegeren has a painting he calls his masterpiece, in the style of Johannes Vermeer, showing Christ at supper with 2 disciples at Emmaus. There is one detail buyers do not know. No confirmed religious painting by Vermeer had ever been found. Van Meegeren is not filling a gap in art history. He is inventing one. He knows exactly who has to believe it first. Abraham Bredius is the most respected Vermeer expert alive, and Bredius has spent years arguing in print that Vermeer likely had an early religious period nobody has ever recovered. Van Meegeren is not tricking Bredius into a new belief. He is handing Bredius proof of the one theory Bredius already wants to be true. He does not deliver the painting himself. He hands it to a friend, a lawyer who has no idea it is fake, and tells him it turned up in an old family estate. The friend carries it to Bredius in good faith. Bredius examines it and declares it one of the greatest Vermeers ever found. A Rotterdam museum buys it for a fortune and unveils it to a public that has no reason to doubt the country's leading expert. The sale. Van Meegeren does not stop at one triumph. Over the next 5 years, he paints and sells 5 more fake Vermeers, earning what would be worth tens of millions of dollars today. He could have quietly disappeared with the money. He keeps painting instead, and that pattern says something about him too. This was never a single con he wanted to survive. It was a private argument with the critics of 1928 that he intended to keep winning. One of those later fakes, the washing of the feet, is bought by the Dutch government itself, years before a single Nazi ever sees his work. Van Meegeren has already fooled his own country's cultural authorities out of a fortune before he ever sells a canvas to the enemy. Then the Netherlands falls under Nazi occupation, and in 1942, one of his fake Vermeers, Christ and the Adulteress, reaches a Nazi-connected art dealer through an intermediary. From there, it moves up the chain to the single worst buyer Van Meegeren could have chosen. Reichsmarschall Hermann Göring, the second most powerful man in Nazi Germany, acquires the painting, reportedly trading over 100 looted paintings from occupied Europe to get it. Van Meegeren has just sold a fake national treasure to one of the most dangerous men on the continent for a fortune, and there is no way to know yet whether that will make him rich or get him killed. The arrest. In May 1945, the war ends. Allied soldiers searching an Austrian salt mine used to hide Göring's stolen art collection find Christ and the Adulteress among the loot. They trace the sale back through the dealer and straight to Han van Meegeren. He is arrested on a charge that could end in execution for selling an irreplaceable piece of Dutch cultural heritage to the enemy. For weeks in a prison cell, he says nothing about how he really got the painting. Then, in July, he finally tells the police the truth. He painted it himself. It was never a real Vermeer at all. Nobody believes him. Confessing to forgery is a strange thing to do while facing execution, unless the confession happens to be a much lighter sentence than the alternative. The investigators assume he is lying to save his life. Van Meegeren has just discovered that the one truth that could set him free is the one thing on earth no expert wants to accept: the proof. So the court gives him one way to prove it. Paint a new Vermeer right now, watch the entire time, with no chance to switch canvases or cheat the process. This is the room from the beginning of this story. Between July and December of 1945, under police guard and in front of court-appointed witnesses, Han van Meegeren paints Jesus among the doctors, in Vermeer's exact style, from nothing. And in a detail almost nobody in the room notices at the time, he quietly paints the face of one of his own supervising witnesses into the crowd of temple scribes, a private signature hidden in plain sight, for later. The finished painting is good enough that even now, some experts in the room still refuse to believe it is a fake, until someone points at one particular scribe and asks the witness sitting 3 feet away to compare that painted face with his own. The verdict. Chemists confirm what the courtroom demonstration already proved. Every fake Vermeer contains a plastic resin that would not exist for another 300 years. At trial in late 1947, the treason charge is dropped entirely, since a fake cannot be stolen national heritage. He is convicted only of forgery and fraud, and sentenced to a single year in prison. By then, the Dutch public has already made up its mind about him. A poll taken that same year ranks him the second most popular man in the country, just behind the Prime Minister. To a nation that spent 5 years under occupation, the story is irresistible. A Dutchman used nothing but paint and patience to make a Nazi leader hand over more than 100 looted masterpieces for a picture that was never real. Van Meegeren never serves his sentence. He suffers a heart attack weeks after the verdict, and a second one soon after that puts him in the ground before the year is even over. The critics who called him a technician with no originality never get to see him serve a single day for the biggest performance of his life. He spent 2 decades being told he had no voice of his own. In the end, the only way anyone truly heard him speak was in someone else's. So was he a fraud who got lucky? Or the only man alive who ever beat Hermann Göring at his own game, using nothing but a paintbrush? Tell us your verdict in the comments and subscribe for the next case.